Welcome to Dubai Part 3. So this is actually a continuation of the previous session. You can tell I'm wearing the same dress. And it is an old maternity dress, but obviously I don't plan on having any babies anytime soon, so it was no issue to just throw it on so I can get some paint on it and keep it moving. I try to make it the road of least resistance when it comes to showing up for myself in the studio, because even though my studio is in my garage and I am at home and I have two kids, it's still difficult to make it down those steps some days. I am still painting through what feels like the dead of summer, so I have all the fans hooked up. That one's hooked up to my Christmas extension cord. In general, I prefer painting out here because when I'm inside, even if I have the tarp down and plastic up, I'm not as free with my brush strokes. I'm worried about splatter, those kinds of things. So this just works great for my process. So now where I'm at, I'm still using my filbert brush. This is probably anywhere between a size like an 8 and a 10. And I am placing some lighter blues and I'm placing some lighter oranges. For this blue mixture, I got it by mixing titanium white, cerulean, a little speck of black, and sometimes I would even add like a little bit of cadmium yellow pale hue, and by a little bit I mean like the smallest little pinchy pinch you could think of. And then for the orange, I got that by doing what did I do for that? I did cadmium red hue, cadmium yellow pale, white, and a wee little speck of black. Sometimes I would even mix in some of that dark blue to darken my orangey mixture. And I don't know, I was feeling the colors. I was feeling it a lot. So at this point, I was a little concerned about my color combos because the orange, like, it was just so orange compared to the picture. And these are times where I really struggle with, should I be more representational and detail oriented, or should I do something that's more expressive and it's just my interpretation of the photograph. So I was worried that the oranges with that blue were looking cartoonish. I don't know. Maybe you love it, maybe you don't. I don't know. But I just be in my head sometimes. So I made sure for this session to set like a 30-minute timer so that I wouldn't overwork it and paint over something awesome. Some of the layers I am mixing the oil paint with mineral spirits, but very sparingly. At this point, I'm primarily using the Galkid Light, and I would use the Galkid Gel, but with these larger canvases, that Galkid Gel is expensive. It didn't go that far for the price, so I'm just trying to place some like highlight-ish marks for the sky and continuing to paint from a distance, getting up every so often to move several feet back to kind of get an idea of if it's having the right balance, movement, emotion. So in the last video, I covered some like fun facts, if you will, about Dubai, and I'll go ahead and share a couple more that I found out. Like the US, they also have like you can't consume alcohol before you're 21. Although, I don't know, the UAE kind of scares me a little bit. So I feel like if they say you can't, like, it just hits a little different. It's kind of like your mom and your dad. Like, the UAE telling you don't drink alcohol is like your mom, and your dad is like the US, where like he might be like, "Oh, take a little sip real quick." I also thought it was interesting that dancing in public there is considered provocative and is a huge no-no. Honestly, after reading some of the restrictions that they had, it made me almost not want to go, but then I have to remind myself that I live in the United States of America, and I mean, I can't even imagine being an international person looking at all the wild things that happened here and being like, you know what, I'm gonna risk it all with these cuckoo birds. So I mean, we can't really throw stones while living in a glass house, so I just try to keep that in mind whenever I'm thinking of a new place to travel to. I still want to put it on my list. I think my husband would be down to go. We haven't done an international trip since we went to Italy and England back in 2018, I want to say. It was like right before I got pregnant with my son and before I became a mom of 3 dogs. Like, what is life? So in January of 2018, it actually was on January 7th, which is my brother's birthday. So my brother's birthday, I was at home. I had actually like just gotten, I don't know if I should say just gotten out of, but I can't say just gotten out of. So I was in a really long-term relationship. It was like almost 7 years, and I had finally was like single. I met, who's my now husband. I was living on my own for like the first time in what felt like forever. And I was pretty excited about that. But unfortunately, the place that I chose to live at, I ended up being involved in an armed home invasion. So Essentially, what happened was I was dating my now husband at the time, Mitch. He was my boyfriend then. And I was living in Lexington. He was living in Louisville. And we had an argument about something. I don't know what, but he was supposed to visit me that weekend. And I told him not to come because I was mad at him. And then he kind of pushed me about it on that Sunday. And at the last minute, I was like, fine, you can come up here and come see me. Well, he had been with me for maybe like an hour. We were sitting on the couch watching Power on TV, and the show Power, like it has like a lot of like, action scenes and gunshots and stuff like that. So while we were watching the show, like the show was loud in itself, but while we were watching the show, I heard like this loud crash, and I looked to my right, and my initial thought was like maybe Baxter, my Beagle Basset Hound, who's very fat and chunky, had like knocked over a table. So I'm looking at the hallway like, what did, Baxter knock over now? Almost like getting ready to get up, except um I think I'm having a stress response as I'm retelling the story. So I look over thinking that Baxter had maybe knocked something over, but in reality what happened was three men, all armed with guns, kicked in my back door, and then they all started running towards me in my living room. So that's what happened there. Long story short, they ended up, robbing me, threatening me, completely destroying my home. It was extremely traumatic. It was a lot. But why am I telling the story? Oh, I know I'm telling the story. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So that happened, and it was extremely traumatic. And it was one of those things where I went to counseling, and it wasn't helping. And the one good thing that came out of the counseling was she just suggested that I start painting, and so that's how I ended up, on your screens today. But outside of that, I had this realization like, man, life is short. Something that's haunted me, and I've done a better job about managing it and trying not to give it that much space, is just like replaying all the different scenarios of how that would have transpired had Mitch not have been there. I mean, like, he wasn't, you know, fortunately, and I say fortunately, which probably surprises some people, I don't have a firearm. And some of the guys that I train with, they brought up, like, that's why I have a weapon. That's why I have. And I was just like, the way that that event went down, if I'd had a weapon, I'd be dead. I really believe in that instance, it would have just escalated it and I would not have survived. But I think about the dynamics of being a woman who was single, living by herself, and, having three men run up on her at night, all with gun, like that scenario and just like all the other ways that it could have gone, and that haunted me for a long time. But I just got to the sense of like, what, all the stuff that I wanted to do that I either put off or wasn't stable enough to do, I'm going to do all of those things. And one of the things was going to Italy. I had been teaching myself how to speak Italian since I'd been in middle school. I'd come across some like language learning books in the library at school, and it always caught my interest. But even though I tried practicing with books and online, I always wanted to practice in person. I mentioned it to Mitch, who was my boyfriend then, and he isn't like impulsive. He likes to take his time with his decisions. And I just was like, I bought my ticket. I'm going. I would love for you to come with me, but if you don't, I'm still going. And it's very likely that I said it that way. I'm glad that I've grown a lot since then. Well, he ends up making it happen. He buys his ticket too, and so away we go. During that trip, we flew into England and we flew out of England, but we made sure to put Italy right in the middle. So it was really nice to be able to like arrive to London, do a couple small things, but not feel too pressured, and then pick up on all the things that we missed at the tail end of the trip. When we arrived to Italy, we arrived in Florence, which was my favorite city out of the trip. We did Florence, and then we did a tour of Tuscany, and that was like magical. Like, I can remember vividly like crying through the streets and going to the Boboli Gardens and crying, twirling in the gardens. Like, we drove Vespas through um, the countryside, and I mean, we did all the things. We did the wineries, and we went to clubs in Rome, and I trained jujitsu. And I trained jujitsu in two places. I trained jujitsu in Rome, and I trained jujitsu in Naples. And the one thing about Naples, though, it's kind of like, it kind of reminded me of the South. Like, their accents were so much harder to understand, but I was just really grateful for how wonderful and compassionate and just hospitable the Italians were. I also really like the small town feel of Florence. I didn't realize how much I would appreciate it until we got to Rome, which very much so reminded me of a New York or a Chicago. It was wild. But Florence being such a smaller place, it just felt more intimate and it just felt like I'm not quite sure how to describe it. Like the culture just felt more rich. And I appreciated that pace more, especially when it came time to try to figuring out the transit system. So, where I'm at with this painting, I started to get to progressively smaller brushes. Again, I think I started off with like a size like 16, and then at this point, I'm probably using like a 4 or a 5. Still probably a filbert, but I try to go smaller as I go lighter. And I'm just trying to decide like where I want my highlights to be. And even at this stage, like I'm not always certain about the composition. And so you'll see me take a rag and just start like wiping things away. Like for example, I there was a section at the top that was just kind of bugging me, and I thought like maybe it might be too dark, so I wiped away one of the dark layers with the intention of like painting over it. And so sometimes I will either leave it exactly the way it looks like after I wiped it, or I'll start, trying a different layer. I knew that I wanted this piece to have some texture, so I'm still kind of considering my color placements as like color blocks, thinking that I'll just go back over it with probably a similar color with the palette knife mixed in with some medium, just to bring it more to life and make it more dramatic. It looks like now I have grabbed some of that light orange and I'm mixing it directly in with that dark color on the bottom, like the black. And toying with the idea of creating some of the watery effects, but it doesn't last. I just feel like it's just too much, and I just really want the emphasis to be on the sky. So I'm grabbing my spray bottle that has the mineral spirits in it, and this helps me a lot in my process. I build things up and I start to kind of break them down some, and then I build them up again. And that in between within that process sometimes yields like really interesting things. And this is also why like I do a lot of commissions, and it's really hard when I get a request to do like the exact same painting because the process is just so intuitive and so sporadic, and it's just it's painstaking to do an exact replica. So that's why I usually recommend like getting a canvas print and then doing something that's similar, because stroke by stroke is not fun. So I went ahead and started painting it another day, and I thought, you know what? I think I'm ready for some texture, y'all. I think it's about that time. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll place as much as I can with the brushes, and then I'll come back with my palette knives. I prefer the wooden ones, not the plastic. And I will apply a similar color and to create like a raised texture effect. I knew that was my goal for this paint session, so I pulled out my brushes again to try to get a final idea in terms of what I wanted to do for this bottom part of the painting. I was kind of playing around with placing some oranges to see if I wanted to add more detail to the water. And then, of course, I changed my mind and decided I'd rather it kind of be just like this big, loose mass and more so gesture or suggest that there are some ripples or light reflections or just any kind of movement in the water. So I'm going back and forth between adding the lamp black with the phthalo blue, and then I'm also adding some of the dark blue mixtures. It's hard to tell with the lighting. It's also hard to tell with the black backdrop, but if you look, you can kind of see that I'm adding a bluish mixture to that bottom portion. And then I'm just pulling that dark color that I have made from the bottom of the canvas and bringing it up to add a little more drama and definition to my clouds on the top. I was nervous adding it. This is something that still gives me anxiety. I don't know why, but sometimes I struggle with thinking that colors are way too dark or way too light. And so what ends up happening is I have a whole bunch of midtones. So I'm trying to keep with, adding a color and stepping back, adding a color and stepping back. And so that's kind of what I saw here. I saw, I was being a little ginger with the color and not making that top part of that sky as dark as I thought it was. Sorry, Selena came on. She is one of my favorite artists. Rest in peace, but some of her songs you can't not twirl while you listen to it. Gosh, when I decided to pull some of that dark black from the bottom of the canvas and pull it back to the top, I just was so excited with the painting. I just felt like it finally was becoming what I wanted to. I felt like I was on the right track, and I thought, man, some texture is really going to set this off. So I'm mixing my color with my palette knife. I'm using an old palette. This palette has so many layers built up on it, so it's making it a little tricky to try to mix my colors. I do believe that I added in Galkid gel, and then I also used the Galkid gel medium to kind of help with that. So I'm starting to apply the colors on the canvas with the palette knife, and that's how it's able to go on so smooth. If you don't add a medium to your mixture, it does not go on that smooth, and it also takes forever to dry. So just try to mix that in. You will not likely not regret it. This can be a really relaxing and meditative technique. I think that's also why when I first started painting, like I only exclusively painted with knives. So it didn't, I'm trying to think. When I decided to introduce brushes into my practice, I had been painting for about 2 years, maybe 3 years. And even then, I was terrified of them. But I really enjoy palette knives. I feel like they're very forgiving. I feel like they are beginner friendly. And I just feel like they are a secret weapon. They create really cool strokes. They are mesmerizing to use. They're even more mesmerizing to watch someone else use, and they're a staple, especially when it comes time to mixing paints. I You'll notice that, like, I mean, maybe they're bad habits, but I like to mix my paint with my brushes, and that is not everybody else's jam, especially if you're into, like, hyper realism and your colors have to be very exact and whatnot. Like, it's not really my jam, so I just really love these knives. So these palette knives, I bought a variety pack. I got them off Amazon. I believe I have my list linked below. And I like to get through a variety pack just so I have different sizes to use, especially given the range of paintings that I complete, anywhere from a little 4 inch by 4 inch to a 5 foot painting. So I'm applying some of the blues that are already mixed, and I'm trying to place them in respect to like similar values, but I'm starting to notice at this rate that something is off. I'm not sure if it's the vertical strokes or if it's the color of the blue, but I'm not feeling that warm and fuzzy feeling like I had earlier. At this point, I'm starting to think, oh crap, I messed up. I made a big old boo boo. And normally, I try not to get too worked up about, losing a magical little pocket that I might have created for myself, but especially when it comes to painting with texture and oils. If you paint thick and you leave it there, it is a pain in the butt to fix, because if the paint has already dried and you try to scrape the paint off, more than likely it'll pull off pieces of the actual canvas texture and it'll leave a hole in your canvas. Yeah, don't nobody got time for that. Yeah. So I was starting to get nervous because I'm like, you know what? I don't think that this was the right fit. I've already applied a ton of paint to the canvas, so I'm just gonna have to eat that cost. Uh, and I'm not in love. So what do I do? I thought there was a chance that maybe I just hadn't committed to doing the different like values, like maybe I'm feeling some kind of way because I've only applied like the darker blues with the palette knife. So I was like, okay, let me go ahead and try to add some white. But the problem that I'm having also is the fact that I let some time get in between the last session and this session, and so the blues that I'm mixing aren't from like aren't they just aren't like last time. They're just not like it. It's a totally different temperature. Like this is more of a cool blue, and the other one was kind of like a muted ish blue. I don't know. It's just it's stressing me out. But I'm just trying to trust the process and think, you know what? Maybe this will be one of those things where I apply these colors, take a step back, and I just fall in love. Hey, I was killing that song, and I had to cut that off. So I love Coldplay. Coldplay holds a special place in my heart. I can remember very vividly, especially in high school, just like it was like the emotional crutch I didn't know that I needed. So every time I hear it to this day, I just have like a visceral reaction to their music. So I'm still in the same boat though. I'm still trying to mix these colors, and I'm thinking maybe I can use the palette knife to kind of blend some of the edges, and maybe it won't feel so wonky. I'm starting to wonder if like maybe like the paint that I applied was too thick. So if I um, move my palette knife in a circular motion along the edges, it'll blend it and it'll start to kind of look better. And now that I see another angle, when I took a step back, like it was kind of getting better, but it still wasn't clear in my mind where I wanted to take it. Now, due to copyright, I gotta speed the music up. So if you're wondering why it sounds a little nasally, that's why. I am really liking the idea of having a little more variant in the bottom. Again, I don't want too much detail, but I'm liking the idea of adding, like, dark blue, dark black, a dark gray. And now I'm also bringing back some of the dark in the sky. I can always tell how a paint session was going based on the contents of my playlist. And so whenever I'm feeling off, I'll do a couple skips, but if I notice like it's still not making a difference, that's when I'll switch to a totally different genre. So this is like a really good example of how, I'll go from Coldplay to 36 Mafia to Beyonce, just kind of like jumping around trying to get a feel for where I am in that space. And, this has been a really trying season. From the time I started this painting to the time I finished it, I had two art festivals. I had the Big Four Bridge Art Festival in Louisville, Kentucky. I had a wedding that same day, and then I had this St. James Art Festival that was 3 days, and that was a whole lot of stuff. And then, there's the whole, you know, genocide that's happening. So I tried using the palette knife to add texture in areas that I thought like I had color blocked. And I'm not sure if I just mixed like the wrong batch of blues, but that tactic with the palette knives just was throwing me off. I just was hating it. So I kind of made amends with the fact that maybe I'm just in the ugly middle, and I just need to kind of like keep on going and just try to trudge through and kind of rethink my whole idea of what I wanted. But I was so frustrated with myself because before I started adding the palette knives, like I was really feeling where I was. I was like, man, this looks so good, to the point to where sometimes I'll get to a stage and it looks really good and I'm afraid I'm gonna mess it up. So I just let it sit, when in reality I need to keep going, because if I let too much time pass in between when I work on it again, then it's like I lose the initial inspiration, and it's almost like sometimes I feel like it like sends me all the way back in the creative process. And that's basically what happened. Like this one sat for a few weeks, and then I tried to come back to it with the palette knives and was like, ooh, honey, we need to get reacquainted. We need to do some couples counseling, some therapy or something, because you are a stranger to me. So I applied like a bit with those palette knives, and then I was just like, you know what? Let me go back. Let me go back to when I fell in love with this baby. And so that's essentially what I did. I grabbed my larger brush, and I just started to kind of try to like reapply. And as I'm doing that with reapplying some of the muted blues and adding some grays, and I'm just like, oh, okay. All right, I'm getting back to something at least. And more than anything, I'm starting to realize like the type of brush strokes that I want visible in this piece. And I don't so much want like a geometric textured look. I want it to have some of those round at like, you know, like look. See what I just did there? That's what I want. I want that. And I get that effect by placing the brush on the canvas, doing a full press, sometimes rotating the brush and pulling at the same time. And there's just something about that effect that I love. I am grabbing the fabric to not only take away some paint, but I also want to kind of soften some of those edges and blend it just a little bit. Just a little bit. And then I'm coming down with the city portion and just trying to define the area a little bit more. And from where I had applied those light grays with the palette knife, like the texture difference was just a little too extreme for me, and so I wanted to soften that. It just seemed jarring, and just it almost looked like there were two different paintings going on between the top and the bottom. And so that's why I was like, well, let me come in with my brush, trying to stay true to the values in the original photo and not have that bottom part be too light, but also not too dark. So I did like the effect though from where I sprayed it with the mineral spirits and got like the drips through. So I try to add that back in here and there, but I just know in the interim, like, I gotta do something about that area. It's just looking like I set a painting on top of another painting as opposed to like one smoothish surface. Switching to a smaller brush, placing some of those oranges again, and trying to decide like if I want to move some of my clouds around. I really like the idea of having that orange kind of peek through the cloud. So that's why I have like some of the blues and some of the grays like on top of the orange to kind of create that effect. And I've kind of recognized like, I've kind of missed some of my darkest darks. So I'm trying to bring some of those back and then add some mediums, so on and so forth. Still just tweaking and deciding if this shade of orange goes well with the blues that I've chosen. The blues that I mixed, I did, the cerulean with the phthalo blue, the lamp black, and the white. I believe I even started to add like a little pinch of cadmium yellow pale hue, like the smallest little speck. And that gave me some interesting things. But I can truly say at this stage, for me to be so far into this painting and have spent so much time on it, I still felt like I didn't know where I wanted to take it. I still wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with it. And so I took a lot of time during this paint session to back up. I would try in between each value actually to go on the other side of the room and just take a look, because I didn't want to be too tight, but I also didn't want to overwork it, and I didn't want to lose a magical mark. So I'm glad that I took the risk to go back and forth between small brushes and large brushes, because I really could not put a finger on what I needed and what was off. So I was just, for lack of better words, throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying all sorts of things. So I let this layer sit for like a day or two. I was kind of on a time crunch because I really wanted to stick to the timeline that I had set out for my collection, fill my words, and this was going to be a part of it. So I was really like every day trying to just do something to it. Sometimes I only had 7 minutes in me, sometimes I had 30. And so you're seeing the transition now between these last two sessions. And I went back in with my mineral spirits and started spraying in some areas, wiping some areas away, and that's when this happened. I decided to name this Dancing in the Dark, and it is for so. I know I covered a wide array of topics, so please comment and let me know what you prefer to hear. Do you want the backstories? Do you want more detail oriented things? Just let me know.